All right, hey everybody, Pastor Brian here with Maple Hill Baptist Church, Kansas City, Kansas. I want to talk about Sukkot, Festival of Booths, or otherwise known as Sukkot or Feast of Tabernacles. This is a festival that Baptists don't oftentimes celebrate or know much about, but I think it's really important because it does have an end times application or implication. So I'm going to try to move really quickly. There's a ton of information here that I want to share, but I'm going to try to get just the most important stuff out to you because there is so much stuff. Today's focus, again, is going to be on Feast of Tabernacles or Booths, otherwise known as Sukkot. Sukkah is the singular Hebrew word for booth, and Sukkot is the plural form. So there's a little Hebrew there. If you hear me use both words, they're the same, just one's plural, one's singular. But other places in the Bible refer to this as the ingathering of the harvest. This is a fall festival to celebrate God's providence of crops, of grain, of fruit. Sukkot is represented in Leviticus 23 when it's first mentioned, when all 7 of the Lord's feasts are mentioned. And so these are not Jewish feasts, these are the Lord's feasts. I want to make that distinction. Sukkot is the 7th feast in the 7th month, and it lasts for 7 days. If we count the beginning of the year as the Hebrew calendar starts around April, then the Feast of Booths would be going on what is now late September 2021. And some years it varies because the calendar is off a little bit each year. There's other calendars that place this in later in October, but this year it happens to be in late September. It's similar to the holiday of Thanksgiving, but there's the thought that Sukkot may have its roots in Thanksgiving. However, the pilgrims did not believe that this celebration was for them specifically because of what it says in the word, that it's for the Israelites born. Those that are born Israelites shall dwell in booths, is what it says in Leviticus 23, verses 42 and 43. So that was, I believe, that was their reasoning for not celebrating this, although we have evidence of early celebrations of fall feasts. It's further detailed in Deuteronomy 16. If you want to check that out, Deuteronomy 16, verses 13 through 15, it says, "You shall observe the Feast of Tabernacles 7 days. After that, you have gathered in your corn and your wine. You shall rejoice in your feasts, you, your son, your daughter," basically everybody that's in your household. 7 days you shall keep a solemn feast to the Lord your God in the place which the Lord shall choose, because the Lord your God shall bless you in all your increase, and in all the works of your hands, therefore you shall surely rejoice. This is one of the only festivals of the Lord that is actually a command to rejoice. So that's pretty cool. It's also detailed, written about the keeping of Sukkot in Nehemiah chapter 8, as well as Zechariah 14, where it's actually giving what I think is a future tense, also a warning against not keeping Sukkot and the repercussions about that. So anyway, the bottom line is this is a really cool thing to study because this is the only feast that we think has not been fulfilled prophetically yet. The others, here I'll give you a rundown of some of these other feasts. You got the Passover, you got the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the First Fruits, Feast of Weeks, Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, and then the 7th one is the Feast of Tabernacles or Sukkot, Feast of Booths. The Passover, we know, is when the Israelites came out of Egypt. God told them to put the blood of a lamb on their doorposts, and the angel of death, if you will, would pass over and not take their firstborn. We know that the Pharaoh's firstborn was taken. That's why he finally released them to go worship God in the wilderness, and which they eventually escaped across the Red Sea. Then we have the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which was the expelling of all yeast out of your household. This is where we get this idea of where Jesus talks about don't be deceived by the leaven of the Pharisees. He was talking about the false doctrine, among other things. And then we have first fruits, which is in several succinct celebrations. We have the first fruits of the harvest, first fruits of the wine, and so forth, first fruits of the barley. And then we have the Feast of Weeks. Feast of Weeks is, as described in Leviticus 23, it is 7 weeks that they're counting, and then on the 50th week you have a celebration which we call Pentecost. And we know in Acts this was fulfilled on the day of Pentecost when the Holy Spirit gave forth the Holy Spirit to all the Israelites. They were able to speak in languages that they hadn't before. Not only that, the Holy Spirit was given, and over 3,000 people got baptized in one day. Okay, so this was a really cool fulfillment. Then we have the fall festivals, the Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, Feast of Tabernacles. Feast of Trumpets, you might say, was fulfilled, but we also know on that great day there will be the trumpet blast. Day of Atonement could be said that when Christ was slain. You could look at that as the Passover, but I could also look at that and say the Day of Atonement was also fulfilled by Christ. Sorry, I'm hearing a little buzz down here. But the Feast of Tabernacles was certainly not fulfilled, and I want to show you how it's going to be fulfilled and the parallels of the Feasts of the Lord, especially the Feast of Tabernacles. There's a little picture. You can pause that if you want to take a look at it. But this is a sukkah, a rooty structure developed in the desert with palm branches and other harder branches to provide some shade from the sun and the elements, right? It wasn't supposed to be a permanent structure. But here we are. Let's see. Bottom line is a few other pictures here's a modern day sukkah. Here's another one. The rules of making a sukkah are that they have to be walled on 3 sides, and you have to be able to see the stars through the roof. They would eat all their meals for the 7 days in this, and they would also even sleep in this, representing a reminder of the wilderness protection that God gave them for 40 years while they were in the desert. Okay, but then I want to show you the parallels between the sukkah, or the Feast of Booths, and a traditional Jewish wedding, which uses a huppah, which is that covering over the ceremony, which looks a lot like a sukkah and a huppah. Now, on one the walls are open, and the other one the walls are closed. It's not going to let me go back. Okay, well, I can only go forward, so here we go. In the arrangement of a marriage, let's just go right into this, because this is the important part I want to bring to your attention. The parallels of the Feast of Booths has its application to the wedding feast, the marriage feast of the Lamb, this prophetic end times event where the bride of Christ is going to marry up with the groom, Jesus Christ. Okay, so I'm skipping a little bit of my notes here, but I just want to get right to the point. So back in the day, a traditional Jewish marriage, and all over the world, matchmaking would be done by the parents. It would be an arranged marriage contract. There would be a betrothal ceremony, so everybody come together. They would make this commitment, and it was as binding as marriage with the exchange of rings, celebration, but both would remain and go back to their parents' house and actually dwell there until the wedding for about 9 to 12 months. For one reason, to make sure that she wasn't pregnant and they weren't rushing into this for immoral reasons. But this was called the preparation period. The preparation period was the period between betrothal and the wedding, that 9-month period. Okay, this is kind of like representative of what we're going through right now, perhaps. But in a traditional Jewish setting, this would be a 9 to 12 month period. They wouldn't have any idea, both the bride or the groom, when the wedding day was going to be. Yeah, they didn't know. They didn't set a date. When the bridegroom was asked the day of the wedding, he could only say something like, "No man knows except my father." When the time was right, the groom's father would issue the approval for the ceremony to begin, and the groom and his wedding party would leave the groom's house to get his bride. The friends of the bridegroom would shout, "Behold, the bridegroom comes," and then they would blow the shofar, the trumpet. The groomsmen would lead the wedding party through the streets and bring the bride back to the groom's home where the wedding canopy, or the huppah, awaited. The wedding ceremony was performed under the huppah. The vows made during the betrothal ceremony were completed in the marriage ceremony, and the ceremony was once again sealed with a cup of wine to indicate the great joy that would accompany the festival. Okay, so that kind of parallels what Jesus says in Matthew 24, verse 36. But of that day and hour, and Jesus is talking about the end times in Matthew 24, not even the angels of heaven, but only my Father. I don't think too many people pick up on that aspect, that Jesus is using language that only a Jewish culture and their marriage ceremony issues would pick up. He says only my Father would know of the day or the hour, you know. So that's a pretty cool little thing that I picked up in studying this that I wanted to share with you. Here we have the illustration of the 10 virgins who are preparing their lamps, filling them with oil, so when they're awaiting their groom, they will be ready. Okay, unlike the 10 virgins who were not ready, who did not keep their wicks lit. So how is this parallel Jesus coming? So I want to show you the wedding ceremony itself. This was the highlight. The wedding feast was the highlight of the wedding ceremony. It consisted of 7 full days of food, music, dance, and celebration. The primary purpose of the wedding feast was to honor the groom in this culture, and all the guests were expected to compose poems or sing songs to the groom. Kind of interesting. Now the blessed bridegroom had received his wife. He was supposed to display her beauty and grace to all who were present. To honor the groom, the bride would put on her beautiful wedding garments that she made during the year of preparation. Oh, that's something else I failed to mention. I think I skipped that part. But what was the husband doing during that time of preparation? He was busy building their house that they were going to live in. And what was she doing during this preparation period? Well, they should have both been keeping themselves pure, for one, but also she was getting her garment ready. She would be making her own wedding dress. Not only that, but she would, after 9 months, being that her husband might come at any time, she would be keeping her lamp lit, be watching and waiting for that day, because she wouldn't know what day he was coming. And then the wedding feast came, okay, and they would anticipate living together after that day. All right, so the significance of this: blessed are those who are invited to the supper of the Lamb. That is straight out of Revelation. I want to go. Oh man, I can't go back a slide. All right, well that's it for now. I guess we'll talk